There was no grand opening ceremony. No ribbon, no campus map, no welcome week. And yet, in the city of Bologna, around the year 1088, something appeared that would change Europe forever. The first university in the Western world. The date 1088 is a traditional founding date rather than a single dramatic opening day, but Bologna's Studium is widely treated as the oldest university in continuous operation in the Western world. But what makes Bologna so fascinating is not just that it was early. It is that, at least in its early form, it was astonishingly modern in one way, and completely alien in another. Because this was not originally a university run by professors, it was in large part run by students. And not just in the symbolic sense, students were in control. Students could organize collectively, negotiate with the city, choose teachers, influence what was taught, help determine pay, and even monitor professors closely enough to recommend fines when they failed to do their job properly. That is not a modern student union dream, that was medieval Bologna. To understand how this happened, we have to begin with a problem that sounds surprisingly familiar. Students coming from far away needed protection. In medieval Bologna, foreign students were vulnerable. They were away from home, exposed to local laws, dependent on landlords, money, and legal arrangements they did not control. So they began forming mutual aid associations, grouped broadly by place of origin, sometimes called nations. These societies were created less as ivory tower academic institutions and more as practical support networks. Only later did teaching become formalized inside this system. That detail matters immensely to the story of Bologna. Because Europe's first university did not begin as a beautiful idea about scholarship for its own sake. It began as a survival structure, a coalition, a protective alliance for students in a city where being foreign could be risky. And when these student groups united around common interests, the result was something new, a larger corporate body, a Universitas Scholarium, in effect, a university. That origin shaped everything. Unlike later models where professors dominated university life, early Bologna gave extraordinary leverage to students. They hired scholars from existing schools in the city. Unlike later models where professors dominated university life, early Bologna gave extraordinary leverage to students. They hired scholars from existing schools in the city. They had bargaining power because Bologna benefited economically from the students flooding in from across Europe. If the students were mistreated, they could threaten to leave, and that threat mattered. So imagine the scene in the ancient halls. You are a professor in medieval Bologna. You arrive to teach one of the most ambitious young minds in Europe. But the people sitting in front of you are not passive listeners. They are, in effect, your clients, your evaluators, possibly even your employers. At Bologna, an elected council representing student groups helped govern the institution. Students could influence the content of teaching and the salaries professors received. Sources also describe a student committee known as the denouncers of professors, whose job was to watch for poor teaching or misconduct. If a professor showed up late, failed to finish the required material, or did not meet expectations, penalties could follow. So yes, one of the world's first universities had a system where students could effectively review the teacher, report the teacher, and help punish the teacher. That is one of the great forgotten twists in education history for sure. And Bologna was not famous for vague intellectualism alone. Its great engine was law. In the 11th and 12th centuries, Bologna became the great center for the study of civil and canon law. This mattered enormously because Europe was becoming more complex. Rulers needed legal arguments, churches needed legal structure, cities needed legal expertise. And scholars in Bologna were helping revive and interpret Roman law, especially the legal legacy of Justinian. This is one reason Bologna mattered so much. It was not simply producing educated people. It was helping teach Europe how to think legally, how to argue from texts, how to interpret authority, how to build systems that could govern empires, churches, courts, and cities. In other words, Bologna was not just a school, it was a machine for training the minds that would run medieval society. And because it became such a magnet for talent, students came from all over Europe. By the early 1200s, Bologna already had around 1,000 students, a remarkable number for the period. That growing prestige also attracted major names. Over the centuries, Bologna's orbit included figures such as the poet Petrarch and the astronomer Nicholas Copernicus. It also became associated with influential churchmen and popes, a reminder that this institution sat close to the nerve centers of religion, politics, and culture. But there is another important twist here. When people hear First University, they often imagine something already finished: a campus, a charter, a neat institutional structure. Bologna was not like that. It evolved. It grew out of loose associations and informal teaching circles. The famous date, 1088, is traditional and symbolic, not the moment a completed institution suddenly sprang into existence. Over time, Bologna gained stronger legal recognition, including imperial privileges for scholars under Frederick I Barbarossa's Authentica Habita around 1158, a milestone in protecting students and strengthening the university world. So when we say Europe's first university opened its doors, the truth is even more interesting. It did not open like a modern institution. It assembled itself, student by student, teacher by teacher, guild by guild, need by need. And that may be why its legacy is so powerful. Because the first university in Europe was not born from ceremony, it was born from organization, from negotiation, from collective self-interest turned into an institution of learning. And in one of history's great ironies, the earliest great university in Europe was built not around the unchecked authority of professors, but around the bargaining power of students. So the next time we think of a university as an ancient, unchanging place of lectures and hierarchy, it is worth remembering Bologna. The oldest university in the Western world began with something far messier, far more dynamic, and far more human. A city full of foreigners, a hunger for law, a network of student alliances, and a classroom where, if the professor wasted your time, you might not just complain about it, you might fine him. Europe's first university did not begin with professors in charge. It began when students realized that together they had power.